is this focus on Eritrea, and why is it being called the de facto, and it's pejorative, North Korea of Africa? What is Eritrea doing that is so, I mean, it's irritating those in power in NATO countries, but also clearly annoying and angering human rights groups, Western human rights groups?
Well, you know, I wrote an article titled Eritrea, the Cuba of Africa. I mean, Cuba is the only country in Latin America came to power by the armed struggle. Eritrea is the only country in Africa that came to power through the armed struggle. So, you know, just like Cuba has been targeted by the Human Rights Watch and all these people and the CIA, Eritrea has faced the same sort of hostility. Because for one thing, Eritrea doesn't owe the IMF and the World Bank any money. They will refuse to take these predatory loans. They're the only country in Africa that hasn't taken these predatory loans from the World Bank and the IMF. So that right off should tip you off to the fact that, hey, Eritrea is unusual in Africa. They're going to stand on their own 2 feet, and they're not going to sell their souls for the short-term money offered them by these, I call them the Western banksters, these predatory financial institutions. And, you know, when you go to Eritrea, they say it's a police state. You can hardly find a policeman on the street out there. I mean, the people are happy. Life is hard. I'm not saying everything's fine because they undergone sanctions for 9 years. There's sanctions and unofficial sanctions still punishing the country now. You know, they're trying to make Eritrea kneel down. And Eritrea's motto is, we never kneel down. And now Abiy Ahmed and the Ethiopian people are starting to say, we'll never kneel down. And this is what's got all these organizations up in arms because, whoa, you get an independent voice in Africa. Now, a lot of people, Eritrea is a small country, easy to ignore, but Ethiopia is one of the 3 largest countries in Africa. And if Ethiopia follows the Eritrean footsteps of independence, nationalizing the land, getting away from these predatory loans, starting to work more with China, this is going to be a role model for the rest of Africa. Now, the reality is, especially for the Europeans, because the United States doesn't have that much economic influence in Africa, but the EU, the standard of living of the EU of the people is dependent on the super exploitation of Africa. EU could not maintain these people's high standard of living and education and healthcare and all these other things if they couldn't continue to rip off Africa, because Europe can no longer super exploit South America or Asia. Africa is the only place left where they can loot and plunder to their heart's content. And Ethiopia is standing up and setting a role model for the rest of Africa is a major threat to the EU's dominance of their own population. So, of course, the EU is going to have to hate Abiy Ahmed because he's moving towards Eritrea. And that means that they're going to be independent.